Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second Eight Bridges Museums panel. I am your host or moderator tonight, Jori Finkel, and I'm really happy to be here. Well, I'm in Los Angeles, and from Los Angeles, I cover art for the West Coast, art of the West Coast for the New York Times and the art newspaper. And I feel very fortunate tonight that we get to talk to three museum leaders about what's going on in their backyards. And I'd like to introduce Monetta White, if you want to give us a wave, who is the director of MOAD. You can see her little logo at the top. It's the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, and she's been on the job, a year now, a very full year now. But before that, she was very involved with the museum as a philanthropist, and helped organize its popular gala, the Afropolitan Ball. She has a history as an entrepreneur in hospitality and restaurants. And next up, we have Sayre Batton, director of the San Jose Museum of Art. She joined the museum in 2015 from the Dia Art Foundation, where she was managing director of Dia Beacon and the Western Projects. She previously held senior positions at the Hammer Museum and the Honolulu Museum of Art. And last but not least, Tom Campbell, who just marked his second year. Is that right, Tom?
Yep.
Yeah, just finished your second year on the job as the director of the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, locally known as the De Young and the Legion of Honor. And he came to San Francisco from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where he had served as director from 2009 to 2017. So thank you all for joining me tonight. And I think we're all excited to hear what you have cooking, and also what you've been thinking about during this particularly strange year. But first, I'd like to raise a toast to museums and the future of museums. And we all have drinks from our Rye on the Road, and I am drinking a Campari drink, so a Negroni. Monetta, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a Manhattan, which is bourbon, of course, with a little vermouth and orange bitters. Very, very appropriate this time of year.
Sayre?
I'm drinking a Cosmopolitan tonight. Chin chin.
And I'm a classic margarita on the rocks with salt.
Okay,
Cheers.
great. Well, it's dark enough here. You can see I'm in LA, but the sun has set. So this is not day drinking, but I'm hoping it will take the edge off. It's been a wild month, a wild year. I've been writing about art long enough to know that being a museum director is not an easy job. And certainly this year has proven that to be true. It hasn't been easy for the museums that have stayed closed. It hasn't been easy for the museums that reopened or reopened partially. And it certainly hasn't been easy for the museums that have reopened only to close again, as is the case with the San Jose Museum of Art, unfortunately. So I'd like to start with this bit of a reality check. It's been a tough year, especially given the pandemic, because of the pandemic. What would you say is the single biggest challenge that the pandemic has created for your institution, and how have you been addressing that? And whoever wants to jump in first, just unmute yourself.
I'll jump in. Thank you so much, Jori. It's so great to see you. And I'm really honored to be on this panel tonight with you, Tom and Monetta. I will just jump in and respond quickly by saying I think the biggest challenge was the very beginning, when all of us did not know what this meant. What did shelter in place mean? We didn't have a definition. We were all facing various kinds of financial challenges that were above and beyond challenges that many of us had faced before. at the institution where we presently serve or previously. I would say to meet that challenge, which might be your follow-up question, was the incredible support of our board and our core constituents who doubled down on their giving and helped us through that period right in the beginning at the end of our last fiscal year to assure us that we were all in this together. And but it was pretty frightening. It was pretty frightening, not just closing, but also seeing the attending financial crisis that was of unknown size.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. As you all know, first of all, Jori, thank you, and thank you, A Bridges, for including me in this panel with this esteemed scholarly group of people. It's an honor to be here with Sayre and Tom. So for me, our biggest challenge, of course, was, we were coming up on our ball and, our biggest gala, which is our biggest fundraiser. So that was definitely a big challenge that we saw right away in regards to financial. But COVID, my biggest challenge is really to make sure that, our frontline staff feel safe and comfortable. We want to address, our visitors. As you all know, the Black community was hit the hardest. And so for me, it's really about just really, doubling down and figuring out, how to reopen really safely if we were going to do that.
Well, again,
and Tom, you are open currently, correct, Tom?
We are open, although we're getting intimations from the city that we may have to close down again as early as next week. We're on tenterhooks. So, well, thank you and good evening to everybody and everyone listening. I think for us, of the many challenges, we don't have a big endowment. And so we're very dependent on earned revenue. And what drives our revenue and our membership and ticket sales is our exhibition program. So with closure and then an exhibition program thrown up to like a pack of cards, that's been the big challenge for us, having to make the books balance. We were very fortunate to get a government PPP loan back in the spring that helped with the previous fiscal year, and we had an amazing response from our donor base and from our trustees in raising a recovery fund that has really helped us balance the books in this fiscal year. And the other thing that's been amazing is, and kind of, making opportunity out of adversity, when we had to cancel or postpone so many exhibitions, we instead organized an open invitational exhibition for Bay Area artists. And we expected a few hundred submissions, and we got 11,500 from over 6,000 artists. So that was amazing. We selected 850 works by 760 artists. And it really brought the museum together, kind of pulling this show together. And it's been so gratifying, the feedback we've had both from staff and from the community and from the artists, that we've been able to do this. Someone described it as a love letter to San Francisco and the Bay Area. So that's really kind of been a morale boost for us in challenging times.
And I understand, I haven't seen that show myself, of course, but I understand that the works are for sale and that you facilitate an introduction to the artist in some ways, even though the museum is not directly involved in the transactions. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. If the artists wish to sell the works, and I suspect that 95% of them were for sale, we created an online catalog, and anyone can see it by going to the museum's website. And we give information about the work of art and the contact details for the artist, so that even, you know, we actually intentionally didn't kind of go in for the red dot on the wall, because even if the work is sold, we wanted members of the public to make the contact with the artist, to build that relationship.
I asked about that, Tom, because I feel like, you know, we know so many artists are struggling right now just to keep a roof over their heads, or to keep a studio, or to, you know, keep their lives in order to continue making art. And I'm just wondering, you know, to what extent do you as museums see supporting local artists during this time as part of your mission? And is there any examples of how you've done that we can think about that can maybe help other museums out there?
Sarah, you're on mute.
Sarah, yeah. Do you want to unmute yourself? You got it.
No, you're back on mute. Oh, there we go.
I'm getting conflicting messages here. Thank you, Tom, for that information. I mean, I think you've given such a great example about helping local artists. It is very important during this time, and we all face this starting in March, where we made a pivot to virtual programs from relying entirely on physical programs in our spaces. And I think that presented many opportunities for all of us. And just like our television hosts who were, you know, broadcasting from home, and the production value wasn't always up to what it had been in the studio, I think many of us went through some of those same growing pains. But these were opportunities, and gave us opportunities to give more artists. And in our case, we collaborated with more local arts organizations in the South Bay in particular, who present performing arts, so that there would be a continual platform for these artists to have. I think the performing arts were hit even harder than those of us in the visual arts in many cases, because people physically just cannot gather. So it's been a great challenge, but also a great opportunity for us to work closely with organizations like Mosaic Silicon Valley, Chopsticks Alley Art. I could name many dozens of organizations that we've been able to collaborate with in order to give these local artists a proper platform.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, MOAD has certainly, you know, have pivoted to our online programming. In fact, we have weekly Artisan Studio, where we are able to give artists that opportunity, that platform to discuss their practices and their art. So it's been wonderful to be able to support so many artists on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think that in this moment when we're all kind of doubling down on our community, we can't travel, we can't bring in shows, we really have to think hard about the communities we serve, and as art museums, the artists in our circle. And you know, obviously for us, the open invitational is a great way to do it, but the virtual realm too. We've started a podcast called Local Voices, where we're looking to bring in the voices of artists and performers in the Bay into contact with our artworks. And I think initiatives, anything like that, is, you know, the more we can do, the better.
And will the Open continue? Is this going to be an annual?
We're looking at that really hard at the moment. We're so delighted by the response that we're thinking maybe of making it a triennial.
Triennial.
Yeah.
You heard it here first, people. Maybe you're thinking about making it a triennial. Okay, well, breaking news. So let's talk a little bit about another pressure that museums have been under this particular year, more than this year really, but we're seeing a lot of museums creating diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives of different kinds in the wake of Black Lives Matter, in the wake of campaigns sometimes very specific targeted campaigns, such as the one that directed at SF MoMA, one of your neighbors, for museums to really root out racial inequity. And so I wanted to ask you if your institution has been changing as a result of this. You know, have Black Lives Matter, have these campaigns to root out systemic racism affected the way you're going about your business? And the more specific you can be, the better. You know, I like to think that museums are really becoming agents of change and agents of social justice, and somehow, you know, more aligned with the missions of their artists. And so I think we're at a really interesting moment, but I'm really looking for specifics here of, you know, what are you in particular doing at the level of exhibitions or acquisitions or hiring or anything? But anyone want to take that away?
Well, I mean, I don't mind starting. I mean, well, you know, no museums or workplace is perfect. The ideas of Black Lives Matter movement has always been at the core of what we do. We were established 15 years ago because of the lack of opportunity for artists of the African diaspora and limited, you know, works on views. So I'm happy that, you know, the Black Lives Matters has shown a light a little bit on this problem, but, you know, it's a beginning and it's going to be hard work. It's going to continue to, you know, to bring more artists, more work, more curators and staff into art institutions. So I you know, there's just so much more work that has to be done. What we've done in the response is to make sure that our diverse staff has, you know, space and time to address any stress that may be feeling of people of color in the museum industry, and know that, you know, it's the team that, you know, that we support one another. So for us, you know, we understand it, you know, that's kind of, you know, how we became, you know. So and then again, there's a lot of work. I mean, I'm so pleased that museums are looking at it, but, you know, how do we stay there? You know, what's the plan for staying there in that space? And, you know, and the question really is, you know, we took so long to get here. It took George Floyd to start having this conversation. And I really don't understand that, you know, for me. So, but we're here, and I know, Thomas, I saw your conversation the other night, and I know that you've been doing a lot of work in this, and you might want to share a little bit of that. I was really impressed with your webinar last week.
Sure. So, and I think the industry, you know, has the museum industry, you know, has been getting more and more engaged with DEAI values over the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of us have made progress in, you know, thinking more expansively about acquisitions, about exhibitions, even, you know, getting greater diversity on the boards. But I think where we as an industry have really failed is bringing greater diversity into our curatorial and administrative ranks. And for me personally, the death of the killing of George Floyd has been an absolute tipping point, because it's precipitated me, and I think the fine art museums, in a discussion and a recognition of the degree to which we are part of systemic racism, that we have been too complacent in accepting racist and colonial narratives without questioning them adequately. So we've really had an intense discussion. We engaged an Oakland-based consultancy called Be the Change, who have been working both with our leadership group, but also giving seminars and discussion sessions for our staff as a whole. And I've been working on a bi-weekly basis with an in-house group of staff who've self-named the idea committee for those values. And we've been looking at activities across the museum, large and small, that may embody systemic racism. And coming out of that, we had developed a strategic plan last year, which we had just got approval from the board at the beginning of this year before COVID struck. And we'd baked into that already a number of DEAI values. But in this moment, we've realized we have to work harder, we have to lean into it much more aggressively. And so we're reframing the strategic plan at the moment and putting diversity and inclusivity as the top goal, really the top institutional goal in terms of programs, in terms of our exhibitions, and most foremost, creating a workplace that will be supportive, will be diverse and supportive of all of our staff and allow all to flourish. So it's words easy, but we really are trying to make this our central, the most important priority in the next few years.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jori, for your question, and Monetta for your leadership. It is indeed such an important time for cultural institutions in America, and a time for all of us in leadership positions to listen and not teach. At SJMA, we were already committed to ensure that 60% or more of the artists on view, and in terms of our acquisitions, were women or people of color. And Jori, you and I talked last summer about our anniversary year, where we only showed visionary women artists to celebrate our 50th anniversary. In fact, we made a joke that the Guerrilla Girls probably wouldn't protest us because of the history over the years of the museum. But pre-COVID, we were reducing barriers to access by eliminating admission fees for students and their teachers. And that has been very important, along with providing didactic materials in Spanish and Vietnamese, thinking about our local community very specifically. And we also work, as I said, with a diverse roster of community partner organizations. But internally as well, we have a lot of work to do. And we have an equity task force on staff. We're consulting with Race Forward, who's in New York and also in Oakland, and continuing trainings on building racial equity, coming right up with all of our staff and with board representatives. And there are things that are entered into the practice from. We just had our first virtual gala and made sure that a percentage of our proceeds went to support Black Lives Matters. So we still have a lot of work to do internally, but our current programs and our external focus, including our current exhibition, Barring Freedom, about prisons and justice, which we organized with the UC Santa Cruz Institute of Arts and Sciences, helps us have an opportunity to learn so much more about visualizing abolition and many more important topics that are relevant today.
I think it's so interesting that we started, Monetta, you started by saying we all have so much more work to do, including MOAD.
Yes.
That, to me, that's I don't know if that was a surprising answer, but I felt like that's so interesting that you're not just looking outward to what other museums need to be doing, that even a museum founded for this reason, yes, because of the lack of visibility of artists of the African diaspora, has more work to do. And you said in particular in dealing with the larger field and some of its prejudices, or?
Yeah, that is correct. I mean, we internally, we look at, our mission statement, the people we serve, and, we're looking at doing that work now because we have to stay relevant, and we understand that, the role changes. So we constantly have to keep looking inward of the work that we do and the mission that we serve. And, you know, particularly, you know, making sure that we are this platform for, you know, Black artists, the artists of the African diaspora.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, one thing I'd like to talk about is audience or visitorship. And I have a kind of a very specific angle or point of view I'd like to try with you or lay on you, as it were, which is in LA, I've watched something happen over the last 6 years, which is essentially an argument for free museums. We saw it first at the Hammer Museum. I think it was 6 years ago. They decided to eliminate their general admission fee. And then when the Broad opened, no fee. And then more recently, MoCA, I think under pressure from its colleagues, decided to go free. The museum directors, museum experts I talk to really have a two-prong argument for this. One is that it boosts attendance overall, and you can see the numbers go up. The MCA in Australia may be the best example of this, where it's been free for over a decade and has the highest visitorship of any contemporary art museum in the world. So number one, you see visitorship go up, and number two, the argument goes, you see a diversification in your audience, that you get people who are not the usual museum going demographic. You get people who are younger. You get a racially diverse, economically or financially diverse, ethnically diverse group as a result. So I want to ask you guys the question, what's holding you back? Why aren't, as far as I understand, you all charge general admission, $10 to $15, somewhere in there. And then with the de Young, the special exhibitions can be a lot more than that. Why charge people to access the museum? Can you go free? Do you want to go free?
I'm happy to jump in. We made a pledge. It was very important to me that we become free, but it has to be underwritten. Tom talked about the requirement for earned income for institutions. And so about 2 years ago, we did get support from a private foundation who granted us free admission that would cover youth, students with ID, and their teachers. And this was a game changer for us. It wasn't entirely free. We're still working on finding, at the moment we're closed, as you know, but we're working on finding other sponsors. But every month that the museum was open during this program, we saw a 16% increase in attendance, sometimes up to 32%. And most importantly, college student attendance went up. And we found people were, staying in the museum and writing their papers and, really making it more of a social hub than it had been prior. The other thing that has been helpful is free admission and expanding evening hours. Other museums are a little bit ahead of us. And in some ways, I have joked with you, Jori, before that, the Hammer is our game plan for many of us in the field. But finding a major sponsor that gave us First Fridays, actually it was Facebook, has been a terrific sponsor. And instantly, we had 900 people on the first night, and it was a younger crowd, and it was a more diverse crowd. And we have all the statistics on that to prove it. But in order to be open for free, we do seek underwriting. And I think that that's an important thing just to mention, because not everyone understands that in terms of the earned revenue focus.
So you have an audience here, Sayre. So you're asking if there's anyone out there who would like to underwrite.
And it's not that expensive.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I do know the details about, how institutions like the Hammer did it. And I think that they've been very generous, sharing with the rest of us in the field.
Yeah, I agree. I believe, museums should be free, but, it is part of the earned income. And I like Sarah's idea, that if we can find an underwriter for that, that's ideal. we certainly have considered it, and we try to host as many free days and free public programs as possible. In fact, most of our online programming is free to attend right now. And so there are financial concerns in becoming completely a free museum. But of course, one day is certainly, that would be a dream.
One day or
I
tonight.
agree.
Or tonight. Things can happen if you get enough interested people together.
No, I agree totally. I grew up in Cambridge in England, where the museums were free, and I would skive off having to play sports by going to the museums, and that's where I learned to love museums. But obviously in America, where most museums are not supported by the government, they're independent entities, we have this pressure to pay the rent, to pay our staff. The Fine Art Museums are both city museums, and we do get support from the city, just under 1/3 of our budget, which is just under $20 million a year, but we have to raise the other 40 million plus. And it's a mix of earned revenue and raised money we get from donors. So we can't just go free because, as I said, we don't have an endowment. We're very dependent on the revenue that especially exhibitions generate. But what we have done, the initiative we took about a year and a half ago, about 6 months after I arrived, was to introduce free Saturdays, first for residents of San Francisco City, and then last fall, about a year ago, we extended it to all of the Bay Area. And it's been very successful. We've basically doubled our attendance on Saturdays. And Jori, as you described, it's bringing in a much more racially and ethnically diverse audience, a much more economically diverse audience, and many first-time visitors who then become return visitors. So that's been really thrilling to see, and we're dependent on that. In fact, that's underwritten by our chair emerita, Mrs. Wilsey, and we very much want to continue that program into the future.
That's interesting. I don't think I've had this conversation with you before, Tom. So I'm just curious to see where you were leaning, where you're heading, should the funding materialize, if you're able to make that happen. Because I do feel like New York offers a different model right now, where the general admission fees are just getting higher and higher and higher.
Yeah.
And we've seen the opposite happen in LA, where the general admission fees have gotten lower and lower, and now have been wiped away because of the underwriting that you've all discussed.
Yeah.
So you would all do it if you could, if you had somebody able to underwrite it. Because there was also this idea floating around that somehow, if you don't have at least some admission fee, that somehow it devalues the experience for people, that people only value things they pay for, like an expensive movie ticket or what have you. Do you give any credence to that?
I'd take the risk and do the experiment.
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
If there are any titans watching who want to,
I would agree, because again, the museum should be accessible for everyone. And so it's important that everybody gets an opportunity to come in and should not be prevented because of an admission fee. So
yeah. You're the comparison that I think had the most legs in some ways was to public libraries. That a museum should be like a public library. And something that you feel ownership in that way. That's really interesting. I wanted to mention to everyone and anyone watching that we are opening this up for questions in about 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function to submit a question, and we'll read them and respond in about 10 minutes. So we have room for a couple more discussion points here. I wanted to ask you just one kind of factual question and find out are any of you at your museums still making acquisitions this year? Are you collecting, and what or why or how are you collecting in such a strange time?
Well, we have acquisition funds which can only be used for acquisitions. They can't be directed to operating even in these difficult times. By the terms of the endowments and by the law that governs museums, we can't change them. So it seemed very relevant to continue to acquire, on a slightly more tempered state, because we don't want to be insensitive to the times. But we have been, in recent years, we have ramped up our acquisition of works by women artists and by artists of color. So we've made some quite significant acquisitions over the last year of, we've got some major Judy Chicago pieces, works by Frank Bowling, by local Bay Area artist Mike Henderson. I think that bringing an artist who are outside the traditional canon is a critical part of making ourselves relevant and engaging with these values we were talking about earlier.
You're nodding, Sayre.
Yes, I first of all just feel fortunate as well that we do have endowed funds specifically targeted for acquisition. And also, like I said at the open, that we have been able to be stable financially so that, our most important acquisition is our staff, and that we have been able to maintain our full-time staff and our teaching artists and our studio art educators throughout the pandemic. But art acquisitions are very important too. And we had a number of conversations with key leaders on the board and donors who urged us to continue building the collection during the pandemic if we can, that it's very important. And one of the best ways to support artists is by acquiring their work. And as I mentioned at the top, we were already committed before the present period in focusing on diverse artists and women. And within our collecting plan, we look at, several different areas, including work by California artists of national and international significance. We look at a lot of artists who work at the intersection of art and technology, and other areas. But the acquisitions committee has been active. Our curatorial team has been active. And we are actually presenting a slate of works that were recently approved by the acquisitions committee to the full board at a meeting tomorrow. So we're hoping to continue. Because we're a contemporary art museum, we don't really have the canonical correction required that many larger and older institutions need to do. But we're very cautious because we just don't know how long the pandemic will last. But within all of those things stated, we are moving forward with acquisitions.
That's really interesting. And any deaccessioning?
No, not at this time.
Yeah.
We deaccession as an ongoing process, but our deaccessioning is the proceeds of deaccessioning are purely for other acquisitions, which has been the standard in the art museum industry.
Can you give us an example, Tom, of something that you deaccessioned this year?
I'm not sure I have an example this year, but we're the departments, especially the American department, is constantly weeding out. I think I'm conservative, and the fine art museums are quite conservative in this, that we follow the concept that it's appropriate to deaccession kind of B grade and duplicate pieces in order to generate funds to upgrade your collection. But there's been quite a lot of attention in the press recently because the AAMD has, in response to the crisis, has loosened its guidelines, and they have allowed institutions to apply some deaccession funds to collection care, essentially some operating costs.
Right.
And that in some cases, some institutions have been quite opportunistic about that, and drawn quite a lot of public attention. For example, the Baltimore Art Museum. Without commenting specifically on Baltimore, I think the challenge here is that many people in the public assume that we're all sitting on piles and piles of valuable stuff. And the reality is that most of the stuff we deaccession, it fetches of very low figures. It's only the modern and contemporary art museums that have the kind of the capacity to deaccession very valuable modern and contemporary pieces. So they are exceptional. Most of us can't do that. And for me, the concern is that, our duty is to our collections, and our collections are not there as a piggy bank to be raided on a rainy day. We really have to go take every precaution we can not to do that, and not to allow our boards or the civic authorities that fund us to think, hey, times are tight, let's sell some art. That
Right.
would be a betrayal of our mission.
Even when times aren't tight, I think from my reporting in the past, there have been a lot of board members at a lot of institutions who think, a lot of board members who are businessmen and businesswomen who think, why don't we sell that one painting? Yeah. So to me, that I wrote an entire article once for the New York Times about how that seemed to me the origin of the AAMD rules against deaccessioning, is the fact that so many board members were so ready to do it, that museum leaders had to band together and create sanctions for each other in the event that happens, so that they have something to stand by and say, no, this isn't kosher in our community. But and Monetta, you were left out of this conversation because you don't have a permanent collection, correct?
That is correct. We're a non-collecting museum. We're just proud to give emerging curators and artists the opportunity to showcase their vision in collaboration with our staff. So yes, we're a non-collecting.
Any discussion of becoming a collecting institution?
I believe there's been discussion over the past. I mean, I just got there, this last year. It's expensive. You got to have, space. But for right now, no, I don't believe that that's part of the discussion at this point.
Okay. Last question for you all is this panel was organized by 8 Bridges, which is some galleries that got together and collaborated on a digital platform. I want to ask you guys about collaboration in the museum realm. Historically, going to when I lived in San Francisco, but also going there since I moved, I have not seen a lot of collaboration among the museums in the Bay Area. Occasional, just not a lot of collaboration, not regular and not lasting. But we all hope to look back at the pandemic as a time when things started changing, maybe for the better, in a kind of infrastructure way or structural way. And I'm wondering if collaboration could be part of that. Let me get a little more specific with this question. Do you envision your museum collaborating more? And if so, can you give us an example of what that might look like or who that might be with? Even if it doesn't come to fruition, I just thought what a great way to end this panel would be with some ideas for how collaboration might take place. Yeah, Tom, you said.
I think we're all very collaborative in certain respects, like loans for exhibitions. We're all very, we've got several pieces from MoMA at the moment in our Frida Kahlo show, for example. But we are also, there's a certain amount of competition for audience and for income. But I think one area that we can really collaborate is that to overcome some of the systemic racist challenges in our industry, we have to, first and foremost, we have to hire a more diverse staff. And, art museums are not necessarily a career path that large numbers of students of color are currently pursuing. So we have really got to focus on internships, fellowships, entry-level positions that are going to bring in the next generation, a truly diverse generation of museum professionals. And I think that this is an area that we can really work together on, creating structures that if we can have.
Tom, can you explain who can work together on? And other museums with?
We directors in the Bay Area and further afield, that we could, if we could set up fellowships that, a student might start off with Monetta and then come to the fine art museums or vice versa. I think this is a real area of opportunity for us to reach out into the community, to work with the universities, to work with the professors who are advising students about career paths, and really try and create more of a structure that could be supportive of a more diverse flow of intake of students of color.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, for us at MOAD, it's already happening. I mean, this year we've collaborated with like YBCA, the Asian Art Museum. We currently have a digital exhibition up right now, Meet Us Quickly, which is in collaboration with the Prison Renaissance and the Jewish Arc Action. So we like these collaborations and doing them. And it might, we all share audiences, of course, but we're very unique in what we do. I mean, MOAD is certainly unique to Tom and SF MoMA in San Jose. So I think there's space for everybody. And Tom, I just give you kudos because when I, first took the job at MOAD, he was one of the directors who reached out to me. And I think the first thing you said to me was, how do we work together in these fellowships and internships and these collaborations? And this was way before George Floyd or any of this that's gone down. And so I do believe that we have to start having these conversations and work together as directors, to diversify this industry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I realized when I came 5 years ago, we're a small museum. We're not a wealthy museum. We are also underendowed. And the only way I thought we would really move forward is through collaboration. So in addition to the local collaborations that I mentioned, we actually do a lot of programs. This is our second collaboration with UC Santa Cruz. I think it's important for a small institution like San Jose Museum of Art to collaborate with universities. We started a student project with San Jose State University, which is 3 blocks away, and a very diverse population. And back to free, they can only work with us if it's free for students. It's a requirement, so that helps. But this is our second collaboration with UCSC. The first was we brought the Janet Cardiff piece, Forest for 1,000 Years, to the campus of UC Santa Cruz, and now with Barring Freedom, the exhibition on view. And it's guest curated by Rachel Nelson and Alexandra Moore from Santa Cruz, with really robust public programs that are organized by Professor Gina Dent. And those are going on. I mean, we're sad that we had to close our doors. We were not going to be opening on Friday to the public, but the public programs are robust because of this collaboration. Also in acquisitions, when I first came, we co-acquired a major new media work by the German artist Tito Steyrl called Factory of the Sun with the Hammer Museum in MCA Chicago, because I looked at the situation as we don't have lots of money for acquisitions. So how about if we partner with other organizations? And finally, we partner a lot with the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, to name just one partner. We co-organized a Southeast Asian Film Festival, and other programs. So for me, I think it's a part of survival, being a smaller institution, but it also brings more cultural richness to our programs. And we all the staffs learn from each other as well as our stakeholders. The final thing I just want to point out is last Sunday, we had the first ever artist videos at the drive-in, and it was a collaboration between San Jose Museum of Art and Caddist in San Francisco. And we also invited the Exploratorium and the ICA in San Jose to partner. There's only one drive-in movie theater, I'm told, in the whole Bay Area. It happens to be in San Jose. So we had a really eclectic, wonderful program, and it sold out. 200 cars came. So we think collaboration is really important pre and during COVID.
Excellent. I just looked at some of the questions coming in, and there's a question that I think piggybacks on this very nicely. So I'm going to start with the questions now. Anyone else have questions? Type them into the Q&A. The first question that I got, how can dealers, how can gallerists better support museums at this time?
Well, this is a great example. What 8 Bridges is doing is a sort of this.
You mean bring us together and fly us drinks?
Yeah.
Okay. You know.
This is collaboration.
This is a collaboration. They're making space for conversations about museums, no doubt. Any other ideas? Any other thoughts?
I think dealers are incredibly generous in ways that are allowed with our fundraising galas and other ways, certainly financially, but also the close relationships. Galleries invite our curators to give walkthroughs with artists that we share in our collection, or we may be showing as well. There are probably dozens of ways in which the galleries are very, very generous. And also it's a symbiotic relationship. I think it's a meeting of the minds.
I'd echo that. Many of us that, galleries financially generous, and with other resources. We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, they underwrite shows these days.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 15 years ago, I did a story for the New York Times about how dealers were beginning to sponsor museum exhibitions. Within like 3 or 4 years, the story seemed quaint because dealers contribute in so many. At the time, there were museums, maybe like the Walker said, we'll accept money just for the catalog, but not for the exhibition. And that has changed significantly. I think a lot of museums depend upon dealers for exhibitions. Is that the case with all of you, that you will take money from the galleries? No? Sayre?
No, I'm still old school. Catalog assistance is most welcome. But gallerists have also, I would point out, the very behind the scenes stuff, have been generous with shipping of artworks, in-kind donations, sometimes when something needs to be fabricated, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, ditto. Especially when a lot of contemporary artworks are quite complex and ambitious and expensive to stage. So we've received support in that sort of sphere.
Speaking of your exhibitions, Tom, one of the questions is very specific. It's with the increase of the virus, with the new numbers. What is the implication for your being able to open the Pompei exhibit at the Legion?
Pompei show was essentially almost ready to be shipped back in, the early fall, and then it was put back. We had to delay it. We were going to ship it now for an opening in December, and with the current kind of new quarantining regulations in Italy, everything has been delayed again. So the exhibition is sitting in Naples, ready to be shipped. We're hoping to ship it early in the new year and to open it in March. The galleries are built, everything is ready. we very much look forward to bringing that show to San Francisco.
And you expect to hear word shortly, you said, from the city?
We're with the
about current.
Yes, with the regression of, with the rise of COVID, San Francisco City has gone in the color coding system applicable in California. We've gone from the best yellow back into red, and there are fears that we may slip back into the purple zone, much like many of the other counties. So while we remain open for the time being, we are, obviously taking the necessary steps if we do have to close down. We hope not to, but obviously it's a very serious situation, and we have to think about the safety of our staff and our visitors.
And Sayre, do you have any way of planning in your case? You opened in late October, closed down already. Do you have any way of planning for a reopening?
We did. We opened October 30th, just on Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. And we got so many responses from visitors that they felt it was safer than going to the grocery store. Like, they really appreciated all the COVID protocols. So we were very sad to go back to that purple tier, that tier 1 on Tuesday, meaning we won't open on Friday. We don't have any indication of how many weeks or how long it will be. So we've created with our, what used to be called the Reopening Task Force. Now we're going to come up with some new acronym because it's opening and closing, kind of creating a toggle where we know how to get the communications out. We know how to deploy the necessary staff. And we had a busy day yesterday doing all of that, but we just don't have an answer exactly on how long we'll be closed this time.
I hear you. I wanted to thank you all for joining me tonight. As it gets darker and darker behind me, this is LA Noir, I guess. I don't know. And so it looks like midnight here, but it is not. And I'd be happy to continue this conversation if only we were in person and we could have people mingle and come up to us and share a drink. But in fact, we're going to say goodnight to everybody. And thank you to 8 Bridges for organizing this. It was really good to see you all. I hope to see you in person sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Jori.
Thank you, Jori.
Thanks.
Thanks to everyone for watching.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Monetta.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.